All right. Good evening to all of you. I'll just be taking a very succinct session on how to write a research protocol. It's not rocket science, but there are a few components in research protocol writing which you need to be aware of, so as to pass the first hurdle to doing the research. That is to go through the research review board and the ethics review committee. So what is a protocol? A protocol is a document that provides sufficient details to enable understanding of the background, objectives, study design, outcomes, analysis, ethical considerations, etc. of your study. So when you are writing out a protocol, you have to consider all of these components to be an intrinsic part of the protocol. You have to provide context, that is the background, what you're looking for, that are the objectives, how you're looking for them, the study design, how you would assess that which you're looking for, the outcomes, how you would be able to find out what you're looking for, that is the analysis part, and how you'd ensure that no one is harmed intentionally during your study. That is the ethical considerations. There are other components of the protocol also which will come across as you go ahead. So this is just a list of the items, and it's a cohesive cohesive document which you need to be well versed with. So why do we need to write a protocol? We need to write a protocol for 4 or 5 main reasons. Other than what is assumed to be the primary reason, that is to get ethics approval, a protocol primarily is to be written so that the researcher themselves are aware of what they want to do, that they have clarity in their mind about the way in which they wish to accomplish that which they wish to do. So it's necessary for researchers because it enforces rigorous scientific conduct. Once you have a protocol, you really can't deviate from that. It avoids bias in planning and conduct. Once, as I said, once you have a protocol, you can't deviate. And it allows for anticipating possible problems. When you write the protocol, there is a component called the review of literature. So as you do a review of literature, you are able to come across various pitfalls and difficulties that researchers before you might have encountered, and how they were able to overcome them. So that will inform your research process also. Secondly, it is necessary for the ethical committees, right? Thirdly, it is necessary even if no participants are involved. Example, systematic review, etc. Again, for the reasons quoted in point 1, for the reasons it is necessary for researchers. Fourth, it is necessary for editors and peer reviewers to judge the quality of the study. A written protocol would force the investigator, that is you, to clarify their thoughts and to think about all aspects of the study. It is a necessary guide if a team and not a single investigator is working on the research. It is essential if the study involves research on human subjects or is on experimental animals in order to get the institution's ethics approval, and is an essential component of a research proposal submitted for funding. So even though in our minds, we usually look at the third and fourth point, that is to get the ethics approval and to get funding for the research, we have to know that a protocol is a hardbound document which is informing research across centers if you are going to do multicentric research. Otherwise, your outcomes will not be rigorous. They will not hold true for wherever they have been done, in whatever way they have been done. As an additional step, if specifically this is highly advisable if you're going for multicentric research where multiple investigators are involved, you should look towards developing an SOP or an operations manual, which should be foolproof. That is, it should lay out the entire process of how you wish to go about doing the research in as much comprehensive detail as possible. No detail is dispensable. No detail is to be discarded. You have to mention every detail that might go into getting research done, because if something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and you have to keep that in mind while developing a protocol. So how do we assess if a protocol we are developing is good enough? A well thought out of and a well composed protocol should be adequate to answer the research questions you are asking, and should be able to achieve the study objective within the given time frame that you are looking for. It should be feasible in the particular setup for the study, and it should provide enough detail that can allow another investigator to do the study and arrive at comparable conclusions or similar conclusions, right? So how to write a protocol? A protocol essentially has multiple components. So as long as you keep this checklist in your mind, you'll not go wrong. You need to have a title, obviously. You need to have an introduction and a rationale, why you're doing the study. You need to review the existing literature to know whether this has been done in the same setting that you have done before also, in which case it would be useless. You need to know the aims and objectives, which you are trying to decipher. You need to spell out the methodology in as much detail as possible, because the more detailed your methodology is, the more it will force clarity into the mind of the investigator, and the more rigorous your research process will become. You need to outline the data collection analysis plan. You need to have a very rigorous ethics statement, and you also need to include a participant information form and an informed consent form. So we'll go through each of these components one by one shortly, because the proof of pudding is in its eating. So after this entire session is over, I'm pretty sure as you start writing protocols, you'll have a much more in-depth understanding of what each of these components pertain to in the process of protocol writing. So firstly, the title of the study, it should be condensed and to the point. Yes, sir.
You have not shared your screen and presentation. You need to share your screen.
I think I have, sir.
No. You have not shared your screen.
Oh, I'm so sorry, sir.
No issue.
Yeah. Yes.
Share your screen on Zoom. Share your screen on Zoom. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
You can
start.
I apologize, sir.
That was.
I apologize.
Yeah.
Should I start from? I'll start from the prior slide, because this is where the actual thing starts.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, sir. So I apologize to all the participants. I thought I'm technologically impaired, so please bear with me. So how to write a protocol? So a protocol has multiple components to it, which fall in tandem to each other, right? As we go ahead with the presentation, we'll go through what each component means in the entire scheme of a protocol. So it starts with a title of the study, followed by the introduction and the rationale, a review of the existing literature, aims and objectives, the methodology, which has to be as detailed as possible, as I mentioned before, so that there is clarity in the mind of the researcher also as to what they wish to do, an outline of the data collection and analysis plan, ethics statement, and a participant information form and informed consent form. So we start with the title of the study. The title should be condensed and to the point. It should be comprehensive enough to relay what you plan to accomplish, and at the same time should be able to inform the reader or other people who are not a part of your research about the methodology that your study proposes to have, right? It may also include the hypotheses that you are exploring at the moment, and it should try to avoid proper nouns, no naming places or naming people, unless it is unavoidable, right? For example, if you make a study title named Study of Tinea Cases, so we have no idea how you're going about doing it, no study design is there, where you will do it, we don't know the study setting, we have no information on what you plan to study in tinea, right? So, but if you like expand it a little and make it more comprehensive and concise, like a cross-sectional study on the prevalence and risk factors of tinea cruris among patients presenting to a tertiary care center in North India, for example. So it tells us what we want to do, it tells us where we want to do it, and it tells us how we will go about doing it. Does it need to be extremely comprehensive and detailed? No, it does not. It needs to be concise, but make sure that it gives the reader a flavor of what you want to do. Because again, in most cases, when you do write a protocol later on, you will be applying for funding. If the funder is not impressed by your title, he might not go through the entire protocol to begin with, right? Second component, as you open your protocol, would be the introduction, right? A good introduction should be able to provide a background as to what you plan to work on, should give brief information on what is known about the particular condition you're working on. So about the incidence or the prevalence or the known risk factors, the affected population groups, previous work that has been done, and the lacune in knowledge. So we need all of this information because we're going to base our research study or your research study based on the information that is already available to you, as opposed to which is and also the information not available to you, the lacune in knowledge, right? So the lacune in knowledge would inform the rationale for your work, as in why is your work unique? What is it that you're doing which has not been done beforehand, right? So rationale is essential. It tells potential funders why your study is worth their money. It tells potential funders that you are not doing the same thing that someone else has done already. No one likes to fund reinventing the wheel. And it helps you clarify your own motivations and provides direction to the methodology. So unless you're very clear about why you're doing it, the rationale of what your study is, it kind of indicates that you should perhaps go more thoroughly in the existing literature and find out exactly how the study that you're going to do is going to add to what you're doing. Next, you go for the review of literature. It is a comprehensive listing of what previous research has been conducted in the domain you wish to work in. Does it need to be exhaustive? No, you need not enlist every research article in the domain that you're going to work on, but it has to be well researched enough so as to inform and justify, so as to buttress your rationale, so that you know what you're doing and you know that what you're doing is unique, right? It should also be able to provide you with insights as to the difficulties that you might encounter once you're doing the research, and should inform your research in a way that you're able to safeguard your study from those set difficulties. Next, we have the aims and objectives. So two components, aim and objectives. Usually one research study has a singular aim. Multiple aims are difficult to achieve, but again, your circus, your monkey, you do whatever you wish to do. An aim should be focused, it should be brief, it should set out the long-term goal of your study, including how your findings would aid in achieving the said goal. And it is usually not longer than a sentence. We do not have multiple sentences in a singular aim. Objectives, on the other hand, should be clear, should be crisp, should be concise. They should be able to serve the rationale of your study and should clearly address what you want to do, where you want to do it, and how you wish to do it. Methodology is at the heart of a protocol. If your methodology is unclear, high chances that your protocol will not pass muster the research review board, leave alone the ethics committee. So you have to be very exhaustive and very detailed in your methodology section. You have to first state the research design, whether you wish to go for an exploratory study where you investigate a problem which is not clearly defined, or a descriptive study where you collect information and just describe the information, or an explanatory study to find a phenomenon that was not studied in depth, or a predictive study, or a hypothesis generating study, right? It should also mention the duration of the study. So again, it is essential that you mention the duration for which you wish to conduct the study. It is not going to be earth-shattering if you exceed the time limit that you wanted to contain your study in. But it is better to have a time frame, because that way there is a higher chance that you'll stick to it. If there are no time frames in a study, then then it might so happen that you might fall back unintentionally. So the duration of the study is very essential for keeping yourself in check. The duration is also important if it is a funded study, because you need to provide annual reports. So your funder needs to know how long they need to ask that from you, right? You need to mention in which the way in which study will be conducted, whether it's going to be blinded or non-blinded, randomized, non-randomized, whether it's going to be hospital-based or community-based, whether it's single-centric or multi-centric, right? You need to mention whether it's going to be a pilot study or not, because when we do a pilot study, the sample size requirements might not be as rigorous as if it is non-pilot study. Next we need to mention the sample size calculations, right? So as mentioned before, if you plan to conduct a study which is a pilot study, then the sample size requirements are not as rigorous. But if it is not a pilot study, then you do need to calculate a sample size which is able to find out what you want to find out with the power that the study needs to have, right? So it should be calculated based on findings from previous similar studies from the same area or the same region or the same country or anywhere. What this means is that when you go for sample size calculation, you first look for similar studies from the same area that you're located in. If you don't find that, then you go for the same region. If that is also not available, then you go for the same country. And finally, if nothing is done in your country in that particular domain, then you go for a study from anywhere, right? And you need to calculate a sample size after you consider your sampling strategy. For example, if you are going for a clustered study or a multi-stage study, then you have to consider design effect. If you're going for a purposive sampling, then you need to consider that while calculating your sample size. So these considerations need to be kept in mind when you're going for your sample size calculation. Next, you need to lay out the entire outline of how you're going to enroll participants in your study, right? So you need to mention the inclusion-exclusion criteria, making sure that the exclusion criteria are not simply the non-inclusion criteria. For example, if my inclusion criteria is pregnant women, then the exclusion criteria would not be women who are not pregnant. That is obvious. That is but natural. You need to write something which is not obvious in the inclusion criteria, right? So you need to mention the study design, how you're going about doing it, and you need to consider that while discussing the enrollment. So if it is multi-stage, then you say that we take a particular state, say state A, it has like 20 districts. So we randomly select B number of districts or N number of districts. From each district, we take M number of blocks, and then so on and so forth. So this entire process of selecting a state, followed by its subcomponents, to the final participant, this needs to be laid out in as much detail as possible, because do understand that if you're only a single investigator, it might be clear to you yourself, but usually larger studies involve multiple investigators. So what is clear to you might not be clear to them, and that might end up leading to bias in your findings. That is something we wish to avoid, right? Secondly, what is clear to you today might not be clear to you 6 months from now. It might be so that the ethics clearance took a longer time than what you anticipated, so that by the end of the ethics clearance, you are not very sure about the methodology you wish to apply while selecting participants. So that is also something you need to be aware of. And finally, before enrolling the participant, you need to clearly mention explicitly in your protocol that you will provide full information about the studies of the potential participant, thereby enabling voluntary informed consent. We will get into this component at the end of the presentation, but you have to make sure that the participant is providing you with an informed consent, which is absolutely voluntary. So next, we need to outline the data collection and analysis plan. So the data collection plan should be foolproof. When I say foolproof, that means no component of the data collection plan should be left to conjecture, should be left to the intelligence of the data collector, should be left to the heavens. You have to outline each and every step that is to be adopted while collecting data. That is how you make your research foolproof, right? You need to mention the process of selecting the area of the study. As you mentioned earlier, you need to mention the process of approaching the participants, whether you approach every household, every consecutive household, random households, systematically random households, completely whatever your strategy is to approach the participants, you have to mention that. And you also have to mention the process of data collection, which tools will be administered and how, tools being either questionnaires or whether you're going to collect biological samples, right? If you collect biological samples, then how will you collect that? If not, the works. So which tools you use to collect information and how do you collect biological samples? All of this needs to be mentioned and laid out in as elaborate a way as possible. You cannot leave anything to conjecture. If you do leave things to conjecture, there are very high probabilities someone somewhere will screw up, and that will impact the outcome of your research. You need to also mention how data will be compiled, whether you're going for a cloud-based compilation, as Dr. Revati told you before I did, or do you wish to go for paper-based collection of data followed by manual entry in a computer-based spreadsheet like Excel sheet? If biological samples are being collected, how will you collect them? How will you transport them? How will you store them prior to their analysis to ensure viability of the sample being collected, right? And finally, how will you secure the data? Securing data means you will need to maintain the anonymity of the participant. You will need to ensure that only restricted number of people are able to have access to the data that you have in your hand. And you'll need to ensure that if there is blinding in your study, then the blinding is rigorous and it is implemented strictly. So you need to mention how you plan to anonymize data. You need to mention how you're going to restrict access to data. And you need to mention how you're going to ensure blinding of the team members. Next, in the data analysis collection plan, we need to ensure that the data analysis plan outlines the analytical methods you wish to subject data to. None of us are fortune tellers or seers, so we do not know how the data would evolve in the future, what kind of data we'll get in the future, how do we go for analyzing that. So you need not be exhaustive in the way you talk about or you mention how you're going to analyze data, but you need to be indicative of what your plan is, because that is also an indication of how informed your protocol writing has been, how informed your objective formulation has been. Because if the data that you end up collecting is diametrically different from the data that you wish to collect and is therefore not able to be subjected to the analysis plan that you had mentioned, there is some incoherence between what you had mentioned and what you have envisaged. So in order to clarify, in order to ensure, in order to foolproof that the vision that you have of data collection, of the kind of data that you want to have in your study is clear, you need to have an analysis plan which lays out an indication of how you're going to analyze your data eventually, at the same time ensuring that that actually tallies with the kind of data you anticipate in your study. You specifically need to mention how your data will be cleaned, anonymized, and coded prior to analysis. So finally, there are two components of the protocol without which the protocol will not be approved: the ethics statement and the participant information form and informed consent form. So the ethics statement should be designed keeping in mind the Helsinki Declaration, the protection of human volunteers and animals as is required, institutional review board, institutional ethics committee, and principles of good clinical practice. So we keep in mind the principles of ethical research always while writing the protocol. We respect the autonomy of persons who participate in the study, ensuring that even those people who have diminished autonomy are not violated. So we ensure a voluntary informed consent. We ensure beneficence and non-maleficence. That is, we ensure that the study is conducted with the good of the people in mind and participants. And the participants should be protected against all foreseeable harm as robustly as possible. It is not possible to protect someone against all harm. So all the harms that are foreseeable in the future, that there should be built-in fail-safe mechanisms within your research which are able to protect those people, those participants from said harm. Justice to ensure just, equitable, forthright, and honest interaction with all participants. Nothing hidden, nothing forced, nothing coerced, equitable treatment. We take an informed consent. We ensure confidentiality and data protection through anonymity and by restricting data access. We ensure integrity. So we ensure that the research should be designed, reviewed, and undertaken to ensure recognized standards of integrity are met and quality and transparency are assured. And we should also very explicitly and clearly mention any conflict of interest if it exists. So finally, we have the participant information form and the ethics and the voluntary consent form. So the PIF, the participant information form, is vital component of any protocol. It should lay out as clearly as possible, and all these points are vital and necessary in a participant information form. It should lay out the motivation behind the study, the participants' role in the study, the potential benefits and harms they might accrue, any compensation that is earmarked for the participants, a statement about how participant confidentiality shall be ensured, participants' right to refuse responding to any of the questions they are asked in the course of the study, participants' right to withdraw consent at any time during or after the study, and information on who are conducting the study and who can be approached afterwards for any issue regarding the study, even after data collection is over. So you will mention your name and your phone number. That is the name and phone number of the investigators, and that should be explicitly mentioned on the participant information form. You'll need to make sure that the form is clear and unambiguous. We do not use ambiguous language. We use as clear language as possible. It should be legibly written for the participants' ease. It should not be in a script too small that they can't read, or it should preferably be typed out. It should be in vernacular, a language that the participant would be able to read and understand. And for illiterate participants or participants who are having diminished autonomy, such as participants with intellectual disabilities, it should be read to them in a language they understand, or should be provided to a trusted companion to be read to them. And it should be retained by the participant after the tender consent. The informed consent form, which is the final component of the protocol, should be in vernacular as well as English. If you are conducting a multi-centric study, then it should be in as many vernacular languages as the centers that are associated, right? So if it's in Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, so it should be Marathi, Gujarati, and Hindi, as well as English. It should be able to record the consent of the participant along with the witness and the investigator. In case the witness is illiterate, thumbprint may be considered as consent. For children less than 12 years or adults who are unable to provide consent to intellectual disabilities, etc., parental or guardian consent may be considered. This is a whole can of worms. While you try and enroll participants who are intellectually disabled or are children, make sure that the consent that you receive from the guardian is after full disclosure of whatever you wish to do. Because please understand that these participants are unable to protect their own rights. So we have to protect their rights ourselves, right? And informed assent may be taken from individuals 12 to 18 years old. Assent is taken when the individual is not old enough to give consent, but is old enough to understand what is being done. So it is usually reserved for teenagers, and children from 12 to 18 years of age are usually able to understand what is being done, even though they might not be able to give consent. So you may take assent from them. So this, in a nutshell, is the entirety of a protocol writing process. It is very easy to tell quickly about how protocol writing is to be done. But as I said before, the proof of pudding is in its eating. You will only be able to learn how to write a comprehensive and near flawless protocol once you start writing protocols and it becomes a practice for you. So with this, I end this session. Thank you very much. And please let me know if there are any questions.